Hello, friends. I am delighted to be here with the UK's preeminent authority on all things social media, the founder of the social media Geekout, Matt Navarra. Thanks very much for joining me, Matt.
Thanks for having me on.
Awesome. So, look, plenty to get into today. I want to talk to you about Twitter/X and Elon and Zuck and Linda Yaccarino and all of that good stuff. But first of all, if you wouldn't mind, just give me a bit of an intro to you, your background, because I feel like I've been, as I said to you just before we joined, following you for years. I don't know exactly how many years that is, but you've certainly been a great source of information and opinion and industry news for me. So yeah, love to get a quick rundown just on your background and kind of how you came to be in this mad world.
Yeah, indeed. Well, thank you. I feel really old now. That's not good. But I've been working in social probably for 20 years experience, really. I think my first social job was 2009. I did do like 5 or 6 years working straight out of uni for a bank, and I was a teacher for a while, and I did a range of marketing jobs before I landed upon a job working for the government as a sort of comms and press PR person in Wales. And then social was kind of becoming a thing, and I took it upon myself to kind of create some accounts to set up for the government department that I was working for. And from there, that snowballed, had some success for that, working for the Cabinet Office and then for Downing Street and a few other government departments. And then I worked for the Next Web for a while, which was a tech news platform and conference business. So I was their head of social for tech news publishing, really, and did that for some time. And eventually, in that period, I built up a little bit of a geeky following about social media news and updates and finding features and things that people didn't know about the platforms, which led to where I am now, really, which is suddenly went freelance in, I can't remember what year it was. I think it was 2019. And I started doing consulting and speaking at events and starting a newsletter and a podcast and everything else. So that's kind of my sort of quick synopsis of how I've come to be in social.
Awesome. Well, as one of said geeks, I would thank you for your service. So look, the main reason I wanted to get you on is to talk about Twitter/X. We've obviously, it feels like there's new news on it happening literally every day, for better or for worse, and that's kind of what I want to get to the bottom of. So, like, first of all, I'd love to get your take on the rebrand on X. Like, is it just needless destruction of brand equity, or do you think it's actually, a smart, brave new direction? Like, where are you on that continuum?
Yeah, I'm torn really on it. Like initially, when I first saw the news, I was actually away on vacation in Greece at the time a few weeks ago, and it kind of all happened. And my first reaction was, oh, what's he doing now? The kind of destruction of the platform had been, going on for some time, and you kind of wondered why he was spending 44 billion on a company, which he's then proceeded to do almost what seems like everything he could to kind of destroy any value it had that could, make it worth keeping in the long run. But certainly when the branding was destroyed and it switched to X, which I think we all kind of knew was coming because he'd been buying the domain and he talked about X and the Anything app, and he's got this kind of addiction and kind of need to have like an X platform. So we all sort of knew it was coming. I don't think we quite realized it would be so dramatic, but we should have probably guessed it would be in some ways, given the speed and the kind of chaos of the previous other changes. But yeah, Twitter's was a cultural phenomenon in many ways. It may not have been the best business from a revenue point of view, and it had the same challenges and risks and issues that all social platforms have with content moderation and harassment and bullying and everything else that comes with a social network. But at the heart of it, it was something that was quite unique and different to everything else that was there, which was what kind of kept it going. It had an outsized cultural relevance and reach beyond what maybe people should expected from it. And it was the heart of news and breaking news. It was a place where you went to get real time updates on things, and there would be trolls and there would be garbage on there, but there was enough value in there for people to kind of keep feeding their addiction with tweets. But now that all of that, the logo, the branding, the kind of the just the term a tweet is now being removed from our lexicon. So it's now posts, which is pretty generic. And I still refuse to call it X. I still, at most you'll get me in a tweet saying Twitter brackets X. But as the weeks have gone by, I think I've got to a point where, I've read what the rationale from Elon is and from the new CEO is in terms of really needing a fresh start, a kind of reset of the brand, and kind of rid itself of all of the things that come with the connotations and associations with its old brand. And it is, Twitter wasn't what it was, and X changed it, and Twitter, Elon Musk made such dramatic changes to it that it wasn't Twitter anyway. People were calling it Twitter 2.0, but in many ways it was a completely different product and platform, and to my mind, not a good one. So we are where we are.
So sorry, just to jump in there. So like you mentioned that the platform had been declining, that they'd ruined what was valuable about it, I think was the way that you put it. So what is the essence of that then? Like where do you think they've gone wrong, and what do you think the ramifications might be?
Well, I think that there was certainly brand equity built up with what Twitter was, and people kind of knowing what Twitter stood for and what it was all about and what services it offered, and its relevance to people in terms of news and as a service of kind of breaking news and information was kind of well established, and relationships and connections to kind of not only to advertisers, which is at the moment obviously in chaos, but certainly with newsrooms, and the thing that kind of for most people it was most famous for and had most success with in terms of social is completely destroyed. And I think that was already destroyed before the change in brand, but I think that this was just the closing of that chapter. I think that it does present new opportunities now because they've completely got rid of everything that was Twitter. There's just a few sort of remnant parts of it to remind us of what it was, and at the heart of it, it's still pretty much the same basic platform, but I think we're going to see even more changes over the months and years ahead, and whether that's for the better, arguably I would say at the moment that it's not, and I don't think it will ever reach the same level of importance or relevance that Twitter did. And even if it did grow its numbers and its audience beyond what it's been able to do up till now, I think that the audience and the sorts of ways that people use it and what people get from the platform will be quite a lot different. And I think the existing users will probably not warm to that, and it will be a different kind of user base.
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, so I'm still hopelessly addicted to Twitter/X, much as I have been for years. But it's obviously changing. I think that the introduction of paid for blue ticks and the prevalence of them and the kind of upweighting of paid for blue ticks in the algorithm, potentially at the expense of impressions for people who don't have them, is a big part of that. Like what is that the biggest change, do you think? Like what else in terms of the actual substance of the feed and what's in there in terms of value to the user is changing? Like do you think that's the main thing, is the promotion of blue ticks above none?
Well, I think that was a significant moment in its recent history in terms of the period since Elon's taken over. The destruction, completely putting a sledgehammer through what most people thought of a verification or what they expected from it. Verification has never been perfect, and it's never been ideal in terms of the method and the process for choosing people to be verified or requesting to be verified. And it wasn't foolproof in terms of it being 100% certain that the person with the blue tick was actually really useful. That's the thing of that is it's all very subjective. However, in terms of for me, going on the platform and being able to use the verified tab to identify out of the many notifications that are on there every day, which ones might be slightly more important or worthwhile checking because it was from a verified account. That was quite a significant, valuable tool to both journalists, to regular power users, and to other users that, as well. But now the blue tick doesn't stand for, or doesn't have any, you can't have any confidence or trust that it's going to be someone that's going to be posting things that are useful to you or interesting or valuable, because it's now a pay to play. Anyone can pay to have blue. And so I think the majority of the people now that are what they call premium, it's not blue anymore, it's called premium, are accounts that
I
have
missed
less.
that one.
Well, they've only just
Know
changed it, and you'd be forgiven given the amount of changes. But the majority of people that are verified are have less than 100 followers, or less than 200 followers, and it's still, I think, less than, between something like 500,000 and 750,000 people out of all of the users on Twitter who have paid for premium, which is 0.5%. So it has completely transformed the platform. That's that one single thing. And we saw the crazy and chaotic implementation that was the start of brands starting to get frightened of using the platform and resisting using it, and they're still fighting to recover from that.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into my next question. So you are obviously you're a consultant amongst many other things. So presumably you're talking to advertisers a lot, as am I, my day job. So I think the introduction of Linda Yaccarino as someone from the media world was obviously intended to try to bring advertisers back on side, try to make the platform compelling for brands and as a valuable platform. What's your take on Linda? Do you think she's doing a good job so far? How much of a job ahead of her do you think she's got?
I wasn't that familiar with her until the role that she took on at Twitter. I'd sort of seen her name mentioned in places. She was, obviously worked with NBC before, and those that work heavily in the advertising field and particularly in entertainment fields, and if you're sort of US based, will be much more familiar, which obviously I wasn't at the time. But in terms of the things that she's attempted to do and is trying to do, all make sense. They're all sensible things, courting sort of really important advertisers, trying to recover a very delicate situation in terms of the strained relationships with advertisers due to Elon Musk's behavior and tweeting, and also his decisions around content moderation and his overall ideology and his ethos around what he wants the platform to be, this whole free speech absolutionist stance, which, we could probably spend an hour debating, the intricacies of that. But to my mind, telling and giving people the ability to say what they want, when they want, how they want, no matter how foul, disgusting, and kind of controversial and repulsive it is somehow the best thing, because it's freedom of speech and it doesn't matter about the rest of the platform. I think is massively misguided. Brands, even with all of the recent changes that they've tried to implement to do add brand safety into the platform, it still doesn't feel like a safe haven or safe place for advertisers to place their content and spend their money. So I think she's done, made some good decisions. I think she's done probably all that she could do in the time that she's had. I think that the challenge will arise for her that she mentioned in a recent interview this week, that she has, people are constantly saying, how much pressure does Elon put upon you, and how much is it his decision goes, and how much do you have autonomy? And she's made it clear that she has autonomy. I think she'll have autonomy until they have a disagreement or of opinion around probably things to do with content moderation and what he does on the platform, what he wants out of the platform. And when that difference of opinion occurs, Elon, we've seen from the last year in terms of how he's treated staff, will likely fire her, or he will overrule her and she will get fed up of being overruled, and eventually that will tire. So I'm not optimistic that in 2-3 years from now we'll see the same CEO in that seat.
Really?
But I think that for the time being, she's doing as good a job as she can do. But I think Elon still believes, and she seems to be going along with the idea that the platform is not Elon and Elon is not the platform, and therefore what Elon does shouldn't matter or worry advertisers, and they need to kind of forget that. Well, no, that not at all, because he is such a controversial figure who's had such a, he's, and he's the ultimate Twitter power user, and he, makes a display of kind of being, intentionally inflammatory on his own platform, and what he says and does and behaves signals everything about what the company stands for, and they cannot make that distinction separate, and unfortunately that's going to be a problem for both of them.
Wow. Okay. So do you think that advertisers are literally looking at Elon as an individual and making judgments about Twitter as a platform because that personal brand is so closely tied to the brand of the business?
Well, he's such a central figure. He is ultimately the main character and wants to be the main character on the platform and does everything in his power. I think he's even tweaked the algorithm at times we've read in the last year to tip it in his favor so that he is the star of the show. And he wants to kind of he thrives off of the kind of adrenaline boost and the ego boost that, being the biggest, most popular user on the platform gives him. And the fact that he owns it and controls it will only inflate that. So I don't think he can separate himself from the company in any meaningful way for business purposes. He's also said in interviews in recent months, I think what the interview with, who was it with? I think it was with one of the American networks, saying that if his decisions mean that the company loses money or he loses substantial amounts of money, that's fine by him. And I think that tells you everything about how he will go about making decisions in the future of the platform.
Yeah, I mean the free speech thing. I don't want to get bogged down too much in free speech, but it's interesting. I was talking to a company called Mantis Analytics in Kiev last week. A guy called Anton, and they're building an AI platform to try to identify and combat misinformation, disinformation. So we were talking about the difference and malinformation, and trying to kind of categorize these different types of content. And in terms of their relative danger. And I think in a case like Ukraine, it's a bit more cut and dry, right? Like like a lot of the time, it's like battlefield information or it's deliberate, Russian propaganda or whatever. I think it's very clear, that they're fighting a war. I think often in the West, in the UK, the US, there probably is more grey area, right? And and as you said yourself, I think every social media company has had real struggles with content moderation. Do you think this is the kind of thing that Facebook has spent years and years trying to perfect, and then, Twitter has just come in and like a bull in a china shop, just sort of thrown all of that received wisdom out the window?
I think that Elon Musk at the heart of all of this doesn't understand how to run a social network, and
Right.
to my mind, in my opinion, his previous business success and his financial success, which probably signals to him that his smart decisions in the past and his achievements in the past are giving him such an ego kind of swell that it thinks almost that he can't make any wrong decision, or maybe it's not that, and it's just that he believes that that the mistakes he's made are insignificant, and that that learning on the job, but ultimately he understands how to make this business a successful one. I think from a kind of basic operational level and from a squeezing out the revenue and cutting out the costs and driving down expenses and all of that sort of efficiency side of things, he's clearly very talented at that and has done what's been needed to do, regardless of whether the way he's approached it has been appropriate or reasonable or whatever else. But in terms of the human element, the psychology of social media and how people interact online, and what by pushing in one thing here, something else pops out somewhere else in terms of the kind of effect of his decision making on a social network. I don't think he fully understands that, and I don't think he will accept that others know better. And he's previously fired people for suggesting that they do know better and that he is wrong. So I think that's part of the problem. In terms of the content moderation side and the kind of decisions to kind of pull down the safety rails and safety guards and to give people more freedom of speech but not freedom of reach, which is a mantra that's been preached for a long time. I think somehow that Elon thinks he came up with that, and he obviously didn't. But I think they're misguided decisions, and they are not ultimately going to serve his business well in terms of creating a platform, whether it's one that generates revenue through subscriptions or through being offering multiple services, all through advertising, that is appealing and attractive to advertisers or subscribers or mainstream kind of users, because we've seen in history with all of the platforms that when platforms become toxic and have problems with content moderation, they're not pleasant places to be. There's all sorts of legal and regulatory problems that it brings with it, and you tend to get the fringes and the extremes of people's behavior and ideologies, and it attracts the kind of, I would say, the worst elements of people that use social, because it permits that, and it's what generates the engagement and the activity. So we're already seeing that he's brought back some of the worst suspended accounts from Twitter from the past, and he's permitting far more, really just unpleasant kind of content to stay on the platform. So that will prevent advertisers and mainstream users from really taking to the platform.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I guess probably their position, or Elon's position, I guess, would be that he's, and this is me completely, like making it up, trying to put myself in his head, is that they're trying to engineer the incentives, right? So they are trying to disincentivize spam by removing reach from unverified accounts, so that the logic would be that, it costs you. If you want to spam, it's going to cost you. If you're serious, then it's not that much money to be a real verified person. And then at the other end, they're trying to incentivize people to create quality content by opening up monetization, which for me feels like quite a big thing. But I am not. I'm, alas, not successful enough to be quite monetized yet. I've seen that you are, and you have been very admirably transparent about how it's working. And I think that I think I mentioned this to you when we spoke previously. I think that will provide real value for particularly the people that subscribe to you. I think it's a really good thing to be doing, that you're just completely putting it out there, saying this is what's going on, this is how much I'm making. May not be super impressed with the way it's working so far, but if I am impressed in the future, I'll tell you, etc. So, tell me a bit about that. How is it working for you? And do you think that they can really hope to compete with the likes of YouTube, who obviously have really incentivized quality content with monetization over, a long period of time? Do you think that X can get into that kind of market?
Well, there's a couple of points to unpack there. So kind of going back to what you said at the start of the point around the fact that, by creating a subscription-based platform and, raising the barrier to entry for spammers and scammers, that's a good thing. There's no question that that's a logical, sensible thing to do. And it's obviously been a smart decision in the sense that we've seen Mark Zuckerberg copy that, and we've seen Snapchat do something similar. So there is something in there, but again, I think the implementation has a lot left to desire. But that's cool. But there is only still 0.5% of the total users, active users on the platform that are verified. So in terms of how much
was that, 0.5%? You said
0.5%.
Wow, what a stat! I didn't know that.
About 500, 600, maybe a bit more, 1,000 accounts in total. Wow. And so in terms of how much revenue that generates, clearly it's insignificant amount, really. It's also doesn't seem to be growing at any significant rate, with no signs of such benefits that I can see that are going to ramp that up. In terms of the rest of the 99.5% or whatever of users that are not verified, therefore can spam. Admittedly, his logic is that if you only give those with blue ticks and premium accounts who've paid the additional reach and stuff, that will kind of curtail it, and maybe it will, but I'm not seeing any signs of that benefit. If anything, I would say the platform's got more spam, more scams, more toxic content, more problematic content than it ever had. So unless I'm missing something, I'm not sure how this is going to work. In terms of the monetization side, So I worked out that in the last 6 months, my account's generated 61 million impressions, which is a fairly decent number.
Yeah, good going.
However, the monetization is based on the number of ad impressions served in the replies of your tweets, and that those impressions are amongst verified blue check users. So it's like very, very specific. And so actually, for me, because my sort of activity is not there to spark huge levels of conversation. Mine's more about, I'm a curator of news and I give my opinions, and I sometimes get into conversations with people, but it's much more, it's quite a lot different. So the people like me don't get a lot of money. So I generated for the month of August the amount of £269 or $367, I think the amount was, right. Which, depending on your state in the world in terms of finances, that's either, well, that's quite nice for £300 or so for doing what you're already doing. Why are you moaning? You're getting something that you weren't getting before. And that's true. But I think that the amount is for a creator, and it's not just me, there are other creators as well who've had small amounts, I would say is very nominal for the amount of effort and time and content creativity they put into the platform. It certainly pales in comparison to nearly every other social platform out there. So I would say there's a huge incentive for me and other users, some other users. However, there are some that are benefiting, and the ones that are happiest are, I would imagine, out of the very small number of people that are blue check verified and qualify for ad revenue share, I reckon probably only 1 or 2%, maybe even less than those of that group, which is already a small group, are getting the checks that people might have seen of 20 grand and 30 grand and 5 grand and 7 grand. And then the ones that are getting it are the ones that are sparking the most engagement on their tweets. And so what do you do if you need to spark engagement on social media? What have we learned in the last 10 years? You be controversial. You say kind of highly emotive, highly provocative things. You spark debates. You stir the pot. And so the incentives that it's creating are not aligned to being a pleasant platform and a safe one for advertisers, whilst it still relies on that ad revenue. That's quite a big thing. So for me, it's the incentives are not there. I think people are shouting me down. The Elon Musk fans are kind of like, you said you hate the platform and you're going to quit and you're going to go to Threads and all that. And I'm like, I would love to leave the platform in many ways, but unfortunately there isn't a appropriate or like for like that I still see as viable yet to kind of replace what I do on Twitter. I'm also a business person. I didn't get to where I am without making sensible business decisions, and the most sensible business decision for now, which may well change, is there's a slight balance in the favour of staying on X because it offers just enough sort of benefit without the hassles and the risks and issues to make it the right decision for now, for me, for the needs that I have. But that could easily shift. And if I had a choice, I would rather be somewhere else.
Interesting. That's a really interesting point you make about, like, because often I think a lot of your output, you're like a news wire for social media managers, right? Or people that work in the industry. You're like a Reuters that's specific to an industry, which has real value, I think. But you're right, it may not necessarily inspire loads of replies. So perhaps there is a disincentive for people creating the kind of content like you do. And as you say, a higher incentive to just get replies. And do you know what? It's interesting. Now that you say it, I'm noticing, I don't know if you've seen this, people are trying to game replies on Twitter now by posting stuff that's obviously wrong so that people reply to correct them.
Well, the algorithm was recently updated, and he's one of the things that has been done, which is a good thing, I think, is and I'm not, some people say, oh, you never say anything positive about Elon, you just kind of always, you can never do right. That he has done some things that are good. I mentioned earlier that, clearly the verification changes to some degree made sense and, were worthwhile, but the way he does things is often the issue rather than what he chooses to do. But in terms of the I've lost my train of thought now with
the
the
replies.
replies, the open source algorithm now, so you can see what is weighted and what factors are being used to run the platform. And the latest update has actually been very transparent about what will get you the most amount of engagement on the platform, the most reach. And it says that if you, for every single reply you generate to one of your tweets, it will be weighted at 20, the same equivalent as something like, I think it's 27 or 37 retweets, something like that. It's quite a large number. It's that much more heavy. So, if you had a tweet and you got some replies, it's far more valuable than a retweet is in terms of how much algorithm boosting you'll get. And then if you reply to those replies to your tweet, and then someone else replies back to your reply, and you have that constant back and forth, the multiples continue in terms of this, of amplification in terms of the algorithm. So the game now is just generate tweets that generate replies and reply to as many of those tweets replies as possible, and that will be your biggest hack, shortcut trick to getting activity and engagement on the platform. And you can see how that could be a good thing, because sparking debate is often a good thing, and having meaningful conversations with people. But the sorts of people that are now heavy users of the platform, the sorts of people that are most likely to pay to qualify for this sort of amplification are people that are super fanatical about Elon Musk, who are right wing and alt sort of platform people you might find on 4chan and people you might find on any number of the other alternative platforms where anybody's banned on another social platform goes. Those are the people that are likely to pay for Twitter Blue, and we are seeing that. And then those are the ones that are creator ad revenue share incentivized as well, and those are the people that are going to get the most amplification based on the latest changes that we've seen to the platform. So it's all shaping up for me as a platform that is not going to be pleasant, and it's not going to get better anytime soon for those that want it to be less toxic and less controversial and less free speechy.
Yeah, I mean, this is, I don't know how shameful this is to admit, but like I kind of find some of that more engaging. I don't know,
People do, and we've
yeah,
seen before that like people there is a certain groups of people in general that are drawn to kind of being as opinionated and as controversial as
yeah.
possible, and kind of it triggers you. People get intrigued, and it's addictive, and you get into these spats, and so
I'm fully addicted.
yeah, and Twitter
It's like,
is, before Elon Musk, Twitter was always known to be a place where people go and shout as loud as they can,
yeah.
and just be angry about things.
Yeah, and it
So
has kind of always been like that, hasn't it? But I've been on Twitter for a long time now, and it has always kind of been a bit of a cesspit, right? I kind of feel like that's part of the reason why people like it
well,
in
it
a
wasn't.
way.
It was always a little bit of a hell site in the
Yeah,
past. It's now
yeah,
just even more so, and the kind of the mixture of the people that are on there. There is an increased amount of people that are, to my mind, sort of the worst characters in those sorts of spats. People that will, conspiracy theorists, people that have strong opinions on politics and religion, and often opinions and views that are not only highly different to the what you might class as mainstream, but the ferocity and the vile nature in which they're happy and prepared to express themselves about those things, and at the detriment and to anyone on the receiving end of their vitriol. That's the problem. I've got no problem with people having opinions, different opinions to me. I think free speech is a very good thing, and I think it's important that people have the right to do that. But free speech, I think, still has limits. It doesn't mean that should be able to go on a platform and share pictures of a dead baby, or I can go on a platform and talk about sort of sexualized images of children and say kind of things that I think it's amazing, I love it, I think it's perfectly fine, and be allowed to say those things. They're highly offensive. They're by anyone's standard inappropriate and not deemed as needed or necessary to have a civilized debate. And I think that free speech has its limits, and I don't think Elon cares for that too much.
No. So, in contrast to the picture that we've just spent some time painting of Twitter, the free speech absolutist cesspit, let's say, which, I have to admit that I am still a 100%.
Well, I'm still there as well. I'm
I'm in
still
it
addicted
all the
as well.
time, so I can't. I think I think I tend to agree with you on some of the points you make. Like, definitely, I'm definitely not a free speech absolutist. Like, you've raised some examples there. I think, yes, for sure, we can't just turn it into a asylum. Do you know what I mean? Like, there has to be limits. On the other side, we have Threads, and I have to admit, I haven't really looked at Threads too much. I haven't found it's got the same level of, like, I don't know. It doesn't grab me in the same way. What's your take? Are you all in on Threads? Are you finding it super engaging, or have you been disappointed so far?
So I was, really kind of keen for it to be as awesome, and obviously wanted it to be the off ramp for Twitter that I could take to transport what I do on Twitter to another platform. And there was, I think, high hopes that it would be. I think there is still possibilities that it could be. I think my first day impression, which I think was included in lots of articles with people sort of picking up on commentary about what people thought. My first opinion in the first 24 hours was, this is good. It's very good. I think that was something like that was my words.
It looks
And
great.
and
It looks like really slick, I think.
it's simple. It's strategically, unashamedly very similar to Twitter in terms of the core functionality. It's like, I describe it as Twitter with an Instagram skin. It's kind of like, it's definitely, and I think this is one of the major problems for people who are on Twitter and feel like I do. And I think there are quite a lot of people that are similar to me. Like they use Twitter in some professional capacity, or as a journalist or as a creator or a heavy user of the platform, who don't make any money from it and don't like the changes that Elon's made and have all the concerns that I've got, but are desperately looking for somewhere else to go. I think that's a big part of why that launch for Threads was so successful, because there was a pent-up demand for an alternative to Elon's hell site. And unfortunately, it's not proved to be the kind of thing that people want it to be yet. And one of the kind of things that suggests it might never be is the fact that Adam Mosseri, the head of Instagram, who's in charge of the product for Threads, has said, I think people misreported it, but his words were along the lines of, we're not going to do anything to encourage or incentivize or motivate journalists, news, politics, and all of the stuff that kind of is at the heart of Twitter to shift onto their platform, because they recognize the problems that causes. They've also got an atrocious and kind of pretty much destroyed relationship with the news and media industry anyway, given what they're doing in Australia, what's happening in Australia and Canada with banning of news content and all the rest of it. And they've scolded and burnt their bridges in terms of relationships with publishers. But that aside, they don't seem to want to court it. But I think it will, if it's going to go over there, it will migrate over there and people will, see it anyway. But the platform just doesn't feel like Twitter in the way that maybe people need and want it to, for those that want it to be a direct replacement, because it still doesn't have that real-time sense to it. It doesn't feel, if you say that Twitter was the kind of the bustling sort of city town square where everyone's shouting and talking, and it's I think you'd say that Threads is more like kind of the kind of goofy kind of beach house where it's a bit more laid back, and the things you would say and do over in the city town square would be very different to what you would do in the beach house. And I think that's kind of sets the scene as to why the content is still quite different. And I don't know whether that vibe will shift. So I think that's one issue. I think the other issue that Threads has got is that it doesn't really have any, it hasn't found its place yet. Like, where does it fit in terms of most people's kind of use of social media? Like, it's not Instagram, but it's tied to Instagram and it has a lot of similarities to it, clearly. It's sort of Twitter, but it's not really Twitter. And it has the ability to do video and some other bits and pieces, but it's not a YouTube or a TikTok. And so then you're left, certainly I felt, I'm like, well, if I want to do tweety Twitter sort of stuff, Twitter still is by far the place to do it, not Threads. If I want to do video in or I go to YouTube and TikTok, and I start going through all the things I'd use social media for, and I'm like, so what do I use Threads for? Well,
Yeah.
where does it fit in? What purpose is it serving that it's not served by anything else? And I don't think I have identified that. So my usage in the first week, I've got like 11,500 followers on Threads, which came in the first 7 days, which was phenomenal because of the tie-up with the Instagram, which was genius and very sort of sensible of them to do to kind of give it that lift. But I found myself using it less and less. I generally just share like one or two things a week there. I just can't find a reason to be there at this time. So that's a problem for them, I think. I think in terms of everything else, in terms of functionality, yeah, there's still missing some key features. I think the advertising bit and the creator monetization stuff, that won't take them long to layer on top, and that will help or give certain types of users another reason to be there. But final point, I think, is that I think many people have said if Threads or if Instagram wants Threads to be successful, it's not going to be successful by being exactly like Twitter, because Twitter was never very successful in terms of as a business. It kind of 300 odd million people compared to most other major platforms which are multiple billion users. It wasn't successful in that sense, and revenue wise, it made most years it made a loss. I don't think it made profits more than once or twice out of its history. So it has to kind of tread this really difficult line of being a bit like Twitter, enough like Twitter that the people who want to get out of Twitter to do things that they do on Twitter to come over, but it can't be too much like it because they don't want the news and all of the politics and all the aggro that comes with it. It needs to be something that's different so that the people who never use Twitter because they didn't think it was for them or hated the site and they were elsewhere on TikTok and everywhere else, they need to create a platform that's going to appeal to those people, which Twitter wasn't. So it's quite a difficult challenge, and I think the question that sits with me now, where we are, is the situation that Instagram and Threads will never be a multi-billion user platform and as popular, more popular than what Twitter ever became, because text-based social media just isn't appealing. It's never going to have the potential to do anything more, and it's maybe Twitter actually got as much as you can get from a platform that's centered around text as its kind of key format, or not. And interestingly, TikTok this week has launched text-based posts. So everybody's having a stab at it because now's the time while there's blood in the water and Twitter or X is wounded, let's all have a go at doing a text-based social platform. But I haven't seen one that says to me that it's going to be a massive hit. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it kind of feels like, if you're shooting for a sanitized version of Twitter, then you've already got LinkedIn, right? Like it's kind of, if you're looking for a version of Twitter that you wouldn't mind showing to your mum and dad and your employer, and it's like nice and happy and not the hell site or cesspit or whatever, like that's kind of already LinkedIn. And like the other thing I find with Threads whenever I go on it is like the people I follow on Instagram, I don't really care so much like what they think about stuff. Like it's people I know.
It's a different vibe. It's a different audience. Like that's been one of the kind of really difficult things for Instagram and Meta, is that it had this ability to tie it to its hit platform Instagram, which had multiple billions of users, but the people that you follow and that follow you on Instagram, which this link up with Threads enabled to kind of automatically sync and follow you also on Threads, are very different to the people that you would have follow and you would choose to follow on Twitter. And the things that the people you follow on Twitter share, that you choose to share because of what they share, and the things you would share on Twitter are very different to Instagram. So suddenly, if you've got a platform that's you're hoping or wanting, or maybe is trying to be a bit like Twitter, and then you've got an audience that's a following that's more aligned to being a bit like your Instagram audience, then it's a very confused picture and may well make it very hard to kind of find the right mix of content or what the right vibe is to strike. And I think that's part of the problem at the moment. People are kind of like, it doesn't serve enough of a function that the other platforms that aren't already serving better, and it doesn't. It's confused in terms of the audience that's there. So yeah, I think that's quite a big challenge for them to overcome.
Yeah. My working theory on threads, and I don't know whether you'll agree with this, is eventually it will just get integrated fully into Instagram, and you just have the option to post a thought in Instagram, and it'll all just be rolled into one. Because I can't see. I'm kind of like you. I can't see where its place is, and I think eventually they'll just sort of roll it in.
I think that, so I disagree. I think what I think will happen is that one of the two directions it will go will either become a bit like IGTV, where they thought they would have video integrated more into the app in what they were doing with IGTV, and then they decided, let's go with a separate app. It needs to be a separate app, and I think it makes sense, and it's the right decision for Instagram to make Threads a separate app. It couldn't operate in what was already a very bloated platform. If you imagine having Instagram now as it is, and they added a new tab that was kind of content of Threads, it would be buried and it would be hardly used. And so I think that would be the wrong decision. And that's why I think that if it doesn't work in the way that they're doing it now, it's more likely to be killed off, or
Right.
just kind of, or very much a minor kind of platform for them, which they'll keep ticking along, or it will, stay as it is. But I don't see them rolling it in. I think that if anything, they're desperately trying to kind of kill off features and get rid of some of the bloat on Instagram. I think it's still very early to say that it won't be a success. I still feel like they've got something there, and I think there's enough will by both them and the people that want it to be something else that's like Twitter to make it successful. And there's a lot of features that they've still not kind of fully added, like desktop web-based version that is coming in the next few weeks. And I think that's very significant for the news industry. Not that they're saying they want them there, but for journalists to have that ability to do on desktop, and for social media managers. I think the stuff to do with the decentralized platform stuff is a red herring. I think that's something that's a much further down the line future play. I don't think the average user really cares too much about that. I don't think it'll be a significant part of any platform for some time, but they need to make moves there. But I think when they add revenue and they give it a bit more of an identity, and it feels a bit more real time, and maybe that will shift things, but I still think it lacks a personality. And and the thing with TikTok is that TikTok isn't just a short form video app, it's the joyful social media app that kind of, it has a very distinct personality. If you go to Reels on Instagram, which is effectively the same product, really, it's a clone of it. Even though it's exactly the same, and it is served to you in the same way in a vertical feed, when you're using Reels and you're using TikTok, you feel differently, and it has a different vibe, and the content, just everything about it screams meta and doesn't have that kind of joyfulness and the addictiveness that is in TikTok. And I think that to some degree, Meta seems to have this kind of way of homogenizing and kind of like making it feel very Facebooky, and that isn't necessarily a good thing, because it feels a bit kind of like bland. And they don't need bland; they need something a bit more spicy, I think.
Yeah, for sure. How are you for time, by the way? I've
Sure,
got.
I'm fine.
Yeah, awesome. So you mentioned, the fact that Instagram has ripped off TikTok. We kind of spoke about text-based platforms becoming more prevalent. I saw a graph on Twitter the other day, on X the other day, showing all of the different sort of functionalities. Live text, newsfeed. And all of the platforms are starting to get all the same ones, because you've got vertical video on X as well now. It feels like they're all kind of figuring out where the fertile ground is, and everybody's going to farm it. To me, is that something that has been a long time coming? Where do you think? Where's the end game with all this? Is it just a set of apps that are all basically the same?
Well, innovation in the social media industry is really, dipped away in recent years. We've seen some kind of new platforms and formats come up, but they've all died or been cloned and then died, or kind of not been that important. For example,
Clubhouse.
Clubhouse and social audio was very much a product of the lockdown and pandemic
Yeah.
and that. And then you have Be Real, which, came out with a buzz, and then that was cloned pretty quickly, and it has limited, use now. We've seen Lemonade, which was another ByteDance platform that got a lot of attention earlier this year and end of last year, and that seems to have kind of faded away.
Do you remember Yo back in the
I
day?
remember Yo, I remember Peach, I remember God, there's tons of them when you start looking back
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
failed social platforms. And they, getting a platform that has network effects and has that can quickly scale and is got a moat that is around it that protects it from just being cloned and becoming a feature of another app, and having the money, the bankroll. Part of the reason that ByteDance was able to get TikTok to where it is because they just outspent everybody. They spent billions of dollars on user acquisition, on numbers of even on rival platforms, amongst many other tactics to drive up quickly the amount of users on the amount of content on the platform. And to some degree, Thread's success is really it wouldn't be alive today if it was somebody else had done exactly the same, but it wasn't tied to Instagram, because that scaling quickly is really important with the social platform. You need people that you care about and are interested in to be there really early on and creating content. So there hasn't been a lot of innovation in the space in social media. A lot of the newest features and the kind of the growth areas of social media right now in the last few years has been around private communities and direct messaging and private social. People are, having listened to probably what we've just been talking about, and the history of social media over the last 10 or 15 years, have learned and become savvy that actually being on social media and sharing your thoughts and opinions, things, is often punished and can cause you career damaging consequences, or it can lead to all sorts of attacks and harassment and all the rest of it. So people are sharing privately. So a lot of the development of Instagram and many of the other apps has been around that area of social, dark social and private social, which is interesting, and it makes it challenging for advertisers and people to kind of who want to reach those audiences if they're not sharing publicly. And I think I saw a video the other day actually about Instagram. The majority of activity that goes on Instagram happens now within the private messaging space. People very rarely are posting comparative to previous years to feed. And I think Adam Mosseri was saying that the people complain, that you don't get, I don't ever see any of my friends' posts anymore in my feed. And he's like, it's not because we're doing a bad job or the algorithm's rubbish or anything else. It's because your friends are not posting to feed, because they are sharing it in group chats and in Discords, and they're using any other number of things. So it's a very different landscape to what it was. And in terms of future, I think, we've got quite a lot of converging significant shifts going on in tech. We've got generative AI and AI which has come out for many people out of nowhere. You've got the metaverse, which is a longer term, so AR and VR, and how will that change what's our main device we consume content and engage in whatever social media we have in those sorts of devices. And we have all sorts of things going on with regulation and people's awareness of the risks and dangers of social media. So it's a very difficult time to be a social network, and it's also a very significant shifting point, or a sort of inflection point, I would say, for what social media will become. And at this stage, it's kind of like all the cards feel like they've slightly been thrown up, and we're now sort of seeing what the next few years are going to look like.
Yeah. It's very strange time. They do feel homogenized, I think, and it's almost like that phenomenon that you mentioned, that people aren't posting much to Instagram. I kind of feel like that was where Facebook were a few years ago, right? It feels like, as with Facebook, so with everyone else. Like, as soon as your parents got onto Facebook, and like it became like there were some people on there that you might have friended like 5 years ago, you can't really remember who they are anymore. All of a sudden, you're a bit more nervous about posting. I kind of feel like maybe that's
Well,
where
there's that, and
Instagram's
there's
getting
also
to.
we've got this other thing which we haven't mentioned, which is what's called the creator economy, the professionalization of
Yeah,
social media. Like influencer marketing isn't new, and user generated content, which brands and advertisers use, isn't a new phenomenon. But in terms of where social media was, say, in the early part of 2010, 2015, and people were sharing more publicly, and there was a lot more innovation in the space. People kind of stuck to their kind of one or two platforms of preference. So maybe they use Facebook heavily, and maybe they use YouTube or whatever mostly. Now there are people are using far more social media apps than they ever were. They're spending time across a greater number of networks and platforms, and often more niche platforms, or in communities within bigger platforms that enable them to kind of feel more open and engaged, because it's more like-minded people. There's a large number of people that are users and consumers of content, but also using it for a business purpose. There's brands and advertisers and marketers on there, but there's this whole industry, a whole number of users that are semi-pro or pro, creators and influencers themselves, and that's why we've got this big war on now with the platforms, with monetization
yeah,
funds, and so people's relationship with social has changed. People's expectation of what social is, and also what's permissible, and we've got even more things that are fighting for our attention, which we could be doing with that time when we were scrolling through TikTok or whatever else. And so, yeah, there's a lot of shifting sand is going on that makes social quite exciting but kind of confused place.
indeed. So I want to kind of start wrapping up by, you mentioned generative AI. I would love to get your take on just where the state of the industry is at the moment. So how much time are you spending with your clients talking about AI, and what kind of form are those taking with advertisers, with brands? Like what kind of conversations are you having?
Well, my line of work typically, some consultants are dealing with paid social a lot more heavily than I do, and are involved in content creation maybe a lot more than I do. Mine tends to be far more zoomed out and sort of strategic from a higher vantage point,
Okay.
and I tend to work with typically larger global companies, less than small to medium sized companies, and that's quite a significant point, because I think some of the biggest impacts that people are seeing with AI in terms of advertising and marketing and social media is the platforms really ramping up and investing in making their ad products better with AI. So making targeting even more sophisticated and automated, and enabling companies and brands and advertisers to create content without having to need maybe a separate expert kind of content creator to do it for them. They can use generative AI to produce the image, or come up with sort of catchy slogans and captions for content and stuff. So that's had a significant impact, and we'll see more and more of that as it gets more sophisticated in the years ahead. We've also seen platforms like YouTube and TikTok using AI to help make the content creation process for regular users, but also more professional creators, simpler and easier. So auto cropping of content for them, automatically detecting what's in the video, and suggesting effects or suggesting music that could be used on them. So all of these things are going on, as well as use of AI to improve the sophistication of the algorithms. Meta's spent the last few years trying to catch up with TikTok in terms of shifting from a social graph to a recommendations engine, and it's kind of slowly getting there now. So I think that's a big area. In terms of my clients, I think most of them are, the social teams are trying to figure out, how do we embed AI into our workflow in a way that actually adds value, rather than is a kind of novelty, or actually creates just as much work as it kind of takes away from us. Because at the moment, I think there's I think it's like 50 tools a week seem to come out that
Yeah.
AI powered such and such, AI powered this, and so there's a bit of fatigue with that. There's a whole skill and knowledge area that needs to be developed within many businesses and organizations, within social teams and the wider marketing team, of prompts and prompt engineering. Having these tools where you can ask it in natural language, come up with 17 slogans to use for a newsletter, to make maximum open rates, whatever. There's so many ways you can say that and sort of program these AI and large language models to kind of give you a response that will be useful. Knowing how to use them and get the most out of them and exploit them is a skill in itself, and that's a fairly large learning curve for some. But for me, I use it to create my cover images for my newsletter, which is a significant thing for me. That would cost a lot of my time and a bit of my money, which I don't need to spend now. And I also use
Midjourney.
Sorry,
Is
so
that
Midjourney,
Yeah.
I use a combination. To be honest, pretty much the mainstream tools that are out there, but increasingly, the OpenAI's and a couple of other kind of dominant platforms are being integrated into Canva and into Adobe and other platforms. And I think that's the thing that's going to. People don't. I would imagine that most people don't want 17 different AI powered tools. They want the tools that they're using to be better than what they are now, with AI as a layer on top that's been integrated into it. And so for me, I get all these tools that come across my desk. So this is a really cool thing that does, helps you send emails without you having to write. You can figures out what you want to say. But most of them are separate from what I'm already using. It requires an additional plug-in. It requires additional steps, and then it's not 100% great. It's sort of like 70% great, and so I still have to kind of tweak things, and then by the time I've done all of that, it's not worth it. So for me, many of the sort of benefits others may be getting from it, I'm still finding that there's too much intervention required to kind of correct the mistakes or to perfect it. So it's not there yet. But I think one of the interesting areas from the social media marketing point of view, and this goes for creators as well as for brands, is chatbots. This was messaging bots where you can get answers to questions from customer service and figure out, your train ticket issues or fix a complaint, whatever it is. Normally these chatbots for the last 10 years have been pre-programmed with a set level of knowledge and statements that it will say, and if you say something it doesn't recognize, it will give you a generic response back, and they weren't very helpful. They didn't feel very human, and they didn't really help brands and businesses as much as they kind of expected or hoped them to. But this shifts things dramatically in their favor, and so that's a whole area of benefit to companies in terms of making cost efficiencies, being able to serve customers better in what feels a very natural way, and when you start laying on top things it can do for you, and think about all of the things that brands could do to make it more useful to you when you engage with it, and beyond just answering a simple question, like giving you the bill to download. Can you give me 3 copies of my statement to download? And can you also tell me what people did I call on the 7th of November? And what's the charge? And it can do all of those things, within limits you should expect nowadays that AI and the chatbots that are set up can do that and a lot more. So I think that's going to be an interesting area to see how they use it, AI going forwards.
Yeah. The level of the volume of output, I think, is just going to be transformed, isn't it? Like, there's just so much more surface area with a brand, between a brand and its customers. You can just have so many more in-depth conversations. It's such a lower
social
level
media
of
managers and advertisers and marketers, professionals are kind of like, as with all these things, when there's a technology shift and a paradigm shift, it's like, is this going to replace my job, and is this going to mean that I get paid less and things? And there are lots of studies already out there that suggest certain industries will be more impacted than others, and there's certain areas that will be make gains and others that will make losses. But certainly for me as a social media consultant, and for those that maybe follow me that are social media managers, it's more going to be enabling and them to do other things and focus on things that maybe are more value adding, to offload some of the things that they don't want to do or don't need to do, because now there are other tools that can do it for them, like image generation, like coming up with copy that's really useful and matches your brand voice because you've taught the AI to learn that, and then giving you capacity to do more things. And maybe the things that you would spend money on as a team to sort because you didn't have the capacity to edit video down and remove, or edit a podcast, remove all the bits and pieces out of it and create a cover image and help you come up, all of that stuff can be done by by an AI, which doesn't require you to pay someone else to do that. So there's money to be spent on other things. So I think it's more a case of the workflow and the things that the teams will be doing and the capacities that they will be freed up are going to be many of the gains for many social media managers. That's how it seems at this stage.
Well, it'll certainly be interesting to see how it develops over time. I find it incredibly exciting, but also somewhat terrifying. But
we haven't seen any exoskeletons with red eyes running around yet. We're some way away from it, but I don't doubt that there will be a moment of crisis when we look back and think this we should have been a bit sort of slower and a bit more measured with our implementation, and I think that's where we are with, I think, the regulators and in various industries that are seeing the jeopardy. Like certainly the music industry has got major concerns over copyright, concerns with deep fakes, and there are all sorts of other industries that, like news industry, in terms of their content being used and for training some of these models, and same with creators. So there are those concerns, but there are all sorts of scary other things that make for great Hollywood scripts that may or may not come to fruition. But at the moment, it's.
I mean, how far down the rabbit hole have you gone on doomerism?
Well, I do like a good kind of
the other week.
Well, I'm a Black Mirror fan, so I kind of like the more ridiculously dystopian the world is, the more exciting it sort of feels to me. Certainly when it's through the lens of a Netflix documentary or TV show. But yeah, when you start reading some of the kind of, there was one this week actually that they had this AI tool that was able to listen to the audio of yourself typing, and it would be able to tell what your password was from your keystrokes, from the audio of it. And then you start thinking, like, we don't need to give scammers and spammers these kind of like abilities. They already have ways to kind of convince us to click on links and then send on friends on Messenger these dodgy kind of content. So we're only seeing the beginnings of how it will be abused.
God, yeah. I'll make sure I won't type in my password to anything while the mic's live. Jesus. All right. Well, look. One last question for you, Matt. The Musk-Zuck cage fight. Who's winning?
Well, we've just heard today, as we're recording this, that it's green light. We are go, and Musk has spoken to the Italian whoever it is in Italy that just can give him permission to kind of fight there and to host it. And
it's a fucking mad world, isn't it? Like,
it's the most twisted, bizarre story. If you were to kind of like look at the news, and be able to travel through time and say a story, some of the headlines we've seen in the last year about Elon Musk and the many other things he's been involved in, it would be like some sort of movie script again. But I think that it's going to be an interesting battle if it does happen. And bear in mind that Elon Musk makes a lot of promises and says a lot of things that don't actually happen. So I'm still skeptical whether we'll see this actual fight. But if it does, my money is 100% on Mark Zuckerberg. He seems to be far fitter, leaner. He's got blue belt jiu-jitsu now. He's if you look at the last pictures I saw Elon Musk, he was on the back of a boat and he looked like this just big white ball of kind of unfit 50, however old he's, 40, 50 something. So I believe he's training now with UFC and other people. So I'm sure he'll be in tip-top condition. But I'm sticking my money behind Zuck on this one.
Yeah, I'm with you. Zuck seems to be legitimately good at jiu-jitsu. He won a tournament.
I kind of want to see Elon Musk get his ass kicked, and but equally it wouldn't.
Elon's bigger. Elon's a lot bigger. That's the one thing.
He's a heavyweight. He's a bruiser more than I think the speed and the svelte nature of I think we've got more chance of seeing Zuck land a few punches. So, well, we may well see that before the year is out. That might make for the most insane news headline of kind of Mark Zuckerberg knocks out in the third round Elon Musk. We'll see.
Yeah, mad world. Well, look, Matt, thanks so much for coming on. It's been a really, really insightful conversation. And yeah, thanks for your time. And yeah, hopefully we'll get you back on again sometime soon.
Thanks for having me.